The metal sphere rolled across the deck with a sound like thunder, leaving a trail of rust-colored water in its wake. Dr. Emma Harrison watched in horror as the object came to rest against the starboard rail of the research vessel Atlantic Pioneer, its surface gleaming with an oily sheen that seemed to pulse in the morning light. Inside the translucent metal, something dark moved with deliberate, measured strokes. Something that shouldn't exist at a depth of 12,000 feet. Something that had been waiting in the wreckage of a submarine that had supposedly never been built. Stay with me, it only gets stranger. You won't believe what really happened. The events I'm about to share began 3 months earlier, in the sterile corridors of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I was Dr. Emma Harrison then, a marine archaeologist with 15 years of deep-sea exploration under my belt. I thought I'd seen everything the ocean could hide. I was wrong. If you like it so far, hit the subscribe button to help people to find stories like this. The call came on a Tuesday morning in September 2023. I was reviewing sonar data from our latest expedition when my supervisor, Dr. Richard Blackwood, appeared in my office doorway. His usually composed demeanor was cracked, like ice beginning to thaw. "Emma, we have a situation," he said, closing the door behind him with unusual care. "The Navy contacted us this morning. They're requesting our assistance with something they found off the coast of Nova Scotia." I looked up from my computer screen, noting the tension in his shoulders. In my experience, when the military reaches out to civilian researchers, it's either because they've stumbled onto something historically significant, or because they're in over their heads. Sometimes both. "What kind of assistance?" I asked, though something in his expression already suggested this wasn't a routine consultation. Richard moved to the window, gazing out at the harbor where our research vessels bobbed in their moorings. 3 weeks ago, a Canadian fishing vessel reported an anomaly on their fish finder. Something large, metallic, resting on the continental shelf at a depth of approximately 11,800 feet. He paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. The initial sonar readings suggested a submarine, but when they cross-referenced the location with historical records, they found something troubling. No submarine has ever been reported missing in that area. No submarine should be there at all. My pulse quickened. Uncharted wrecks were the holy grail of marine archaeology, but military vessels carried additional complications. Questions of national security, classified information, diplomatic sensitivities. "Have they sent down any cameras?" I asked. Richard turned back to me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, perhaps, or something deeper. "They have. That's why they're calling us." He walked to my desk and placed a tablet in front of me. The screen showed a grainy underwater photograph, the kind of image you get from deep-sea ROVs operating at the very limits of their capability. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The wreck was intact, sitting upright on the seafloor as if it had been gently lowered into position. But as my eyes adjusted to the murky details, I realized why Richard looked so unsettled. The submarine's hull bore markings I didn't recognize. Not American, not British, not Russian. The script was English, but the design philosophy was unlike anything in my databases. More disturbing still, the vessel appeared to be in remarkable condition for something that should have been on the ocean floor for decades. "Richard," I said slowly, "this looks almost new," he finished. "That's what has everyone concerned. The hull classification suggests it's from the 1940s, but the preservation is impossible. At that depth, with those currents, even the most advanced metallurgy shouldn't look like this after 80 years. I studied the image more closely. The submarine's conning tower was adorned with symbols that seemed familiar yet wrong, like words in a language I almost understood. Along the hull, I could make out what appeared to be external modifications, strange protrusions and equipment that didn't match any known naval architecture. "What does the Navy want from us?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "They want a full archaeological survey. Document everything, photograph everything, and if possible, recover any artifacts that might explain what this vessel was doing there." Richard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Emma, they've classified this at the highest levels. Whatever we find down there, very few people will ever know about it. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of preparation and briefings. I was assigned a small team of specialists. Dr. Michael Chin, a naval historian with clearance to examine classified wartime documents. Lisa Rodriguez, our best deep-sea photographer, and James Wright, a marine engineer who specialized in underwater recovery operations. We departed Woods Hole on the research vessel Atlantic Pioneer on a gray Friday morning. The crew had been told we were investigating a routine wreck site, but I could see the questions in their eyes as we loaded equipment that was clearly more sophisticated than a standard archaeological survey required. The journey to the site took 18 hours. During that time, Michael buried himself in historical records, trying to find any mention of submarines operating in the area during World War II. Lisa ran diagnostics on our camera equipment, ensuring every system was functioning perfectly. James reviewed the technical specifications of our ROV, Deep Explorer, making adjustments for the extreme depth we'd be working at. I spent most of the voyage staring at that first photograph, searching for details I might have missed. The more I studied it, the more questions arose. The submarine's design incorporated elements I'd seen in captured German U-boats, but also features that seemed decades ahead of their time. Most puzzling of all was the hull itself, not just well-preserved, but bearing what appeared to be recent damage. Scratch marks and dents that looked fresh, as if something had been trying to get inside. We reached the coordinates at dawn on Saturday. The ocean was calm, almost unnaturally so, stretching to the horizon like a sheet of dark glass. Captain Morrison, a veteran of countless research expeditions, supervised the deployment of our equipment with his usual efficiency. But even he seemed affected by the atmosphere of secrecy surrounding our mission. "Dr. Harrison," he said as we prepared to lower the ROV. "In 30 years of deep-sea work, I've never seen the Navy take this much interest in an old wreck. Whatever's down there, it's got them spooked." The descent took nearly 2 hours. At that depth, the ocean becomes an alien world, where sunlight has never penetrated and the pressure would crush a human body in milliseconds. Our ROV's lights carved through the darkness, revealing a landscape of mud and scattered debris that spoke of decades of slow decay. Then, at 11,792 feet, our lights found it. The submarine sat in a depression in the seafloor, surrounded by a perfect circle of disturbed sediment. As our cameras moved along its hull, I found myself holding my breath. The vessel was even more intact than the preliminary photographs had suggested. Paint still clung to the metal in places, and the external equipment I'd noticed in the first images revealed themselves to be devices I couldn't identify. "Jesus!" James whispered from his position at the control console. "Look at the hull plating. That's not standard wartime construction." He was right. The submarine's outer shell showed evidence of advanced welding techniques and metallurgy that wouldn't be developed until the 1960s. Yet everything else about the vessel's design screamed World War II era. "Take us along the conning tower," I instructed Lisa, who was operating the camera systems. "I want a clear shot of those markings." As the ROV maneuvered into position, the submarine's identification became visible. HMS Erebus, followed by a hull number that made Michael's face go pale. "Emma," he said, his voice barely steady. HMS Erebus was a Victorian-era ship. It disappeared in the Arctic in 1845 during the Franklin expedition. There was never a submarine by that name. The implications of his words settled over the control room like a fog. We were looking at a vessel that shouldn't exist, bearing the name of a ship that had been lost over a century before submarines were even practical. "Keep filming," I ordered, fighting to maintain my composure. "Document everything." As we continued our survey, more impossibilities revealed themselves. The submarine's deck gun was a design I'd never seen before, incorporating elements that seemed to blend German and British engineering. The hull showed evidence of compartments that didn't match any known submarine configuration. Most disturbing of all, several of the external hatches appeared to have been opened from the inside, as if the crew had attempted to escape after reaching the bottom. "Dr. Harrison," Lisa's voice was tight with concentration, "you need to see this." The ROV's camera had focused on the submarine's stern, where a large section of the hull had been torn away, not by age or corrosion, but by something with tremendous force. The metal was twisted outward, and in the beam of our lights, I could see into the vessel's interior. What I saw there made no sense. The submarine's inner compartments were filled with equipment that belonged to no historical period I could identify. Computer terminals that looked decades ahead of their time sat alongside brass instruments that seemed pulled from the 19th century. Cables snaked through the water like seaweed, connecting devices that should never have existed together. "Take us inside," I said, knowing that I was crossing a line that would change everything. The ROV slipped through the tear in the hull, its lights illuminating a space that defied explanation. The submarine's interior had been modified extensively, with bulkheads removed and new equipment installed in every available space. Charts covered the walls, showing ocean currents and underwater formations in impossible detail. But it was the crew quarters that stopped my heart. Personal belongings floated in the water, preserved by the cold and pressure. A leather-bound journal, its pages somehow still intact. Photographs of people I didn't recognize, wearing uniforms that combined elements from different nations and different eras. And scattered throughout the compartment, objects that had no business being there. Electronic devices decades ahead of their time, navigation instruments of impossible sophistication, and containers filled with substances I couldn't identify. "Dr. Harrison," James's voice was strained, "the ROV's sensors are picking up something strange. There's still power running through this wreck." Before I could respond, every light on the submarine flickered to life. Emergency lighting bathed the interior in a red glow, and somewhere in the depths of the vessel, machinery began to hum with life. Our ROV's instruments went haywire, electromagnetic interference cascading across our screens in patterns I'd never seen before. "Pull back," I shouted, but it was too late. Something moved in the submarine's forward compartment. Not the slow drift of objects in water, but deliberate, purposeful movement. Our camera caught a glimpse of machinery activating, of systems that had been dormant for decades suddenly resuming their functions. Then the transmission cut out. We spent the next 6 hours trying to reestablish contact with the ROV, running diagnostics and adjusting frequencies. Nothing worked. Deep Explorer had simply vanished, along with our only direct link to the wreck below. "We need to surface and contact the Navy," Richard said during an emergency conference call. "This is beyond our capabilities." But I couldn't let it go. The images we'd captured, the impossible evidence of technology that shouldn't exist, the submarine that bore the name of a ship lost in the Arctic. It all pointed to something extraordinary. Something that demanded answers. "Give me 24 hours, I pleaded. "One more dive with the backup ROV. If we can't learn anything more, we'll abort the mission." Richard's reluctance was evident, but he agreed. The backup ROV Deep Surveyor was older and less sophisticated than the one we'd lost, but it would have to suffice. We spent the remainder of the day preparing for what might be our final attempt to unlock the submarine's secrets. Sunday morning brought clouds and rough seas. Captain Morrison expressed concerns about the weather, but I convinced him that our window of opportunity was closing. If the Navy decided the site was too dangerous, they might classify it permanently and bury any chance of discovery. The second descent began at dawn. This time, I insisted on maintaining continuous communication with the surface, and we approached the wreck with extreme caution. The submarine sat exactly as we'd left it, but now it seemed different somehow. More alert, as if our previous visit had awakened something that had been sleeping. "Keep the ROV at a safe distance," I instructed the pilot. "No closer than 50 meters until we understand what we're dealing with." Even from that distance, we could see that the submarine had changed. Lights continued to glow in its interior, and there was evidence of movement within the hull. Equipment that had been scattered by decades of water pressure appeared to have been repositioned, organized with mechanical precision. "Emma," Michael's voice was barely a whisper, "look at the conning tower." I followed his gaze to the submarine's highest point, where something impossible was happening. The observation windows, which had been dark and empty during our previous survey, now showed signs of activity. Shadows moved behind the glass, too regular and purposeful to be the random drift of debris. "That's impossible," James said. his engineering background making him the first to voice what we were all thinking. There's no way anyone could be alive down there. The pressure alone would have killed them decades ago. But as we watched, one of the shadows approached the window and pressed against the glass. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw the outline of a human face looking up at us through 11,000 feet of water and 70 years of time. The ROV's camera zoomed in automatically, seeking to focus on whatever had triggered its motion sensors. What we saw next would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was indeed a face, but one that defied every law of physics and biology I understood. Pale and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to hold an intelligence that was both human and utterly alien. The figure was wearing what appeared to be a naval uniform, but one that combined elements from different countries and different time periods. As we watched in horrified fascination, the figure raised one hand to the window. Its movements were slow and deliberate, as if it was operating in a medium far denser than water. Then, impossibly, it began to tap against the glass in a pattern that Michael immediately recognized. "That's Morse code," he said, his voice shaking. "It's sending a message." The pattern repeated 3 times before the figure disappeared back into the submarine's interior. Michael frantically scribbled notes, translating the dots and dashes as best he could remember from his naval training. "What does it say?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Michael looked up from his notes, his face white with fear. "Help us. We're still here. We're still here." The implications of that message struck the control room like a physical blow. If there were survivors in that submarine, people who had somehow endured decades at crushing depth, then we were looking at something that challenged every assumption about human physiology and survival. But even as that thought formed, I knew it couldn't be true. No one could survive at that depth for 70 years. Whatever we had seen, whatever had sent that message, it wasn't human. At least not anymore. "We need to surface," I said, my scientific curiosity finally overwhelmed by a survival instinct that had kept our species alive for millennia. "Now." But as we began to raise the ROV, something extraordinary happened. The submarine's hull began to crack along carefully engineered seams, sections of plating sliding away to reveal the vessel's true nature. What we had taken for a conventional submarine was actually something far more sophisticated, a kind of mechanical chrysalis designed to protect and preserve whatever was inside. As the outer hull fell away, the submarine's interior was revealed in all its impossible glory. Instead of the cramped quarters and utilitarian design of a wartime vessel, we found ourselves looking at a space that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of architecture. Corridors twisted through dimensions that shouldn't fit within the submarine's external dimensions. Equipment hummed with power sources that had no earthly origin. And throughout it all, figures moved with purpose and intelligence, tending to machinery that served functions I couldn't begin to understand. "Dear God," Lisa whispered, her finger frozen on the camera controls. "What are they?" The figures were human in basic shape, but changed by decades of impossible survival. Their skin had taken on a translucent quality, and their movements showed adaptations to high pressure and zero light. They worked together with the coordination of a hive mind, each individual perfectly synchronized with the others. As we watched, one of the figures approached what appeared to be a communication console. Its fingers moved across controls that glowed with their own inner light, and suddenly our ROV systems came alive with incoming data. Charts and diagrams flooded our screens, showing ocean currents and underwater formations in detail that surpassed anything in our databases. Navigation data that covered not just Earth's oceans, but bodies of water on worlds we couldn't identify. And woven throughout it all, a message in perfect English that made my blood run cold. "We have been waiting for you, Dr. Harrison. We have so much to show you." The message was signed with a name that made Michael gasp in recognition. Commander Jonathan Ashworth, HMS Erebus, Franklin Arctic Expedition, 1845. According to every historical record, Commander Ashworth had died in the Arctic ice over a century and a half ago. Yet here he was, communicating with us from the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, in command of a submarine that shouldn't exist. "This isn't possible," James said, his voice breaking with the strain of trying to process what we were seeing. "None of this is possible." but possibility had ceased to matter. We were confronting something that existed beyond the boundaries of known science, something that challenged every assumption about reality itself. The data transmission continued, filling our computers with information that would take years to fully analyze. Star charts showing Earth's position relative to celestial bodies that weren't in our solar system. Biological data describing life forms that existed in the deepest parts of Earth's oceans, creatures that had never been cataloged by marine biology. And most disturbing of all, detailed records of human settlements at depths where no human should be able to survive. Dr. Harrison, the voice came through our communication systems with perfect clarity, as if Commander Ashworth was standing beside me rather than speaking from 11,000 feet below. We have been preparing for this moment for 78 years, ever since we discovered the truth about what lies beneath the ocean floor. I found my voice, though it sounded strange and distant to my own ears. Commander Ashworth, what happened to your expedition? How did you come to be here? There was a pause, and in that silence I could hear sounds that had no place in our reality. The whisper of wind through ice, the creaking of wooden ships, the voices of men calling to each other across frozen wastes. We found something in the Arctic, Dr. Harrison. Something that had been waiting beneath the ice for longer than human civilization has existed. It showed us truths about our world that your surface science cannot yet comprehend. The ocean is not empty, Doctor. It never has been. As he spoke, the submarine around him began to change. The interior walls became transparent, revealing the true extent of the structure beneath. What we had taken for a single vessel was actually the uppermost level of a vast underwater complex that extended down into the abyssal depths. Corridors and chambers carved from the living rock of the ocean floor, all of it glowing with the same impossible light we had seen in the submarine. There are cities down here, Dr. Harrison. Civilizations that predate your recorded history by millions of years. We are their guardians now, their ambassadors to the surface world. And you, Doctor, have been chosen to carry our message back to those who can understand its significance. The ROV's cameras panned across scenes that defied comprehension. Vast underwater caverns filled with structures that combined organic and mechanical elements in ways that seemed to grow rather than be built. Gardens of luminescent organisms that had never seen sunlight, yet thrived in the crushing depths. And throughout it all, figures that had once been human, adapted and changed by forces I couldn't begin to understand. Commander, I said, fighting to maintain some semblance of scientific objectivity. What do you want from us? The answer came not in words, but in images that flooded our screens. I saw the Earth as it truly was, and not the blue marble of photographs, but a world honeycombed with passages and chambers that connected every ocean and every sea. I saw civilizations that had risen and fallen beneath the waves while humanity was still learning to make fire. And I saw the future that awaited our species, if we were willing to accept the truth about our planet. The surface world is changing, Dr. Harrison. Your climate, your oceans, your very existence is balanced on the edge of transformation. We offer knowledge that could save your species, technologies that could heal your world. But the choice must be made freely, with full understanding of what it means. As Commander Ashworth spoke, the submarine began to rise. Not quickly, but with the inexorable patience of something that had waited decades for this moment. Our ROV's instruments registered the movement, confirming what our eyes were seeing. We're coming up, Dr. Harrison. We're coming to meet you. The ascent took 6 hours. During that time, we maintained contact with the surface, reporting our situation to increasingly frantic Navy officials. Plans were made and discarded, contingencies prepared for scenarios that had no precedent in human experience. As the submarine rose through the layers of the ocean, it changed. The impossible interior spaces folded in on themselves, returning to dimensions that made sense within our understanding of physics. The glowing lights dimmed to levels that wouldn't blind surface dwellers. And the figures within prepared themselves for their first contact with the upper world in over 7 decades. But it was what happened next that would forever alter my understanding of reality itself. At 8,000 feet, the submarine's hull began to shed layers like a molting insect. What fell away wasn't metal, but something that looked organic, almost like scales or carapace. The vessel that emerged was sleeker, more purposeful, covered in a substance that seemed to absorb and reflect light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Emma," Lisa whispered, her camera still recording despite the terror in her voice. "The water around it is changing color." She was right. The ocean around the ascending submarine had taken on a luminescent quality, as if the vessel was trailing some kind of bioluminescent wake. Fish scattered from its path, but not in the random panic you'd expect. They moved in formations, as if responding to signals we couldn't detect. At 5,000 feet, we received our final transmission from Commander Ashworth. His voice had changed, taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate through the water itself rather than through our electronic systems. "Dr. Harrison, what you are about to witness will challenge everything your species believes about life on this planet. We ask only that you remember, we were human once. We chose this transformation to preserve something far more precious than our individual lives." The communication ended with a sound like singing, but no human throat could have produced those tones. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, a harmony that spoke of intelligence and longing and loss beyond human comprehension. At 3,000 feet, the submarine breached a thermal layer, and our instruments detected something that shouldn't have been possible. The water temperature around the vessel was increasing rapidly, not from any external heat source, but from the submarine itself. It was generating energy through some process that violated every law of thermodynamics I understood. "Captain Morrison," I called to the bridge, "you need to see this." When he arrived in the control room, his weathered face went pale at what our screens were showing. The submarine was no longer alone. Other shapes were rising from the depths, smaller vessels that moved with organic fluidity through the water. A convoy of impossible craft, each one unique in design, but sharing the same otherworldly characteristics. "Jesus Christ," Morrison breathed. "How many of them are there?" We counted at least 12 distinct vessels, ranging from craft the size of our research ship to smaller objects that might have been personal submarines. All of them glowed with the same inner light. All of them moved with the same purposeful intelligence. At 1,000 feet, something extraordinary happened. The lead submarine, the one that had once been HMS Erebus, began to change shape. Its hull flowed like liquid metal, reconfiguring itself for surface operations. What had been a deep-sea research vessel transformed into something that could function in our world. But it was the emergence itself that broke my mind. The submarine surfaced at exactly noon, rising from the Atlantic like a metallic whale. Water cascaded from its hull in sheets, but instead of falling back into the ocean, the liquid seemed to cling to the vessel's surface, forming patterns that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Then the hull opened, not with mechanical precision, but with organic fluidity. Sections of the submarine's exterior peeled back like flower petals, revealing an interior that defied every law of physics and biology I had spent my career studying. Commander Ashworth emerged first, and I understood immediately why he had warned us about what we would see. He was still recognizably human, but changed in ways that spoke of decades spent in an environment no human was meant to survive. His skin had taken on a translucent quality that revealed the circulatory system beneath. His eyes had adapted to eternal darkness, enlarged and luminous in the sunlight. When he moved, it was with the fluid grace of something that had learned to navigate in 3 dimensions. But it was his expression that haunted me. Despite the physical changes, despite the impossible transformation he had undergone, his face held an intelligence and humanity that was unmistakably human. He looked at our research vessel with eyes that held decades of longing for the surface world he had left behind. "Dr. Harrison," his voice carried across the water with perfect clarity, though I could see no technological means for amplification, "thank you for answering our call." Behind him, other figures emerged from the submarine's interior. Men and women who had once been part of various expeditions and research missions, all of them changed by their exposure to whatever lay in the deepest parts of the ocean. They moved together with the coordination of a school of fish, each individual perfectly aware of the other's intentions. "Commander," I called back, my voice barely steady, "what do you want from us?" He smiled then, and despite everything that had changed about him, It was a perfectly human expression of joy and sadness combined. "We want to go home, Dr. Harrison. But first, we need to show you something that will change how your species sees this planet forever." What happened next defied documentation. The submarine and its escort vessels arranged themselves in a complex pattern around our research ship, creating what I can only describe as a living mandala on the ocean's surface. The water between the vessels began to glow, and suddenly I could see down into the depths as if the ocean had become transparent. Miles below us, vast structures stretched across the ocean floor. Not ruins, but living cities that pulsed with activity and intelligence. Civilizations that had existed since before humans walked upright, adapted to the crushing depths and eternal darkness of the deep ocean. "Your species stands at a crossroads." Commander Ashworth's voice seemed to come from the water itself now. "Climate change, pollution, overpopulation, all of these threaten not just humanity, but the delicate balance that has existed in Earth's oceans for millions of years. We offer knowledge, technology, partnership, but the choice must be yours." For 3 hours, we remained connected to that impossible network of intelligence that existed beneath the waves. I saw technologies that could clean the oceans, energy sources that could power civilization without damaging the environment, medical advances that could extend human life indefinitely. But I also saw the price of that knowledge, transformation, adaptation, acceptance that humanity was not alone on this planet and never had been. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the contact ended. The submarines submerged with the same fluid grace they had shown during their ascent, leaving only disturbed water and impossible memories behind. But Commander Ashworth left us with a gift, the metal sphere that had rolled across our deck that morning. Inside its translucent shell, something moved with purpose and intelligence. Something that would, in the months that followed, prove to contain biological samples and technological data that would revolutionize our understanding of life on Earth. The official report classified our findings at the highest levels of government secrecy. The submarine wrecks were declared off-limits to civilian research, and all physical evidence was transferred to facilities I was never allowed to visit. My team was reassigned to different projects, and we were forbidden from discussing what we had witnessed. But some secrets are too large to contain. In the months following our encounter, reports began to surface from research stations around the world. Sonar contacts with unidentified objects in the deepest ocean trenches. Biological samples that contained genetic markers unknown to terrestrial science. Communication signals originating from depths where no known technology could function. The sphere they left us continued to pulse with its own inner light, and sometimes, in the depths of night, I could swear I heard voices calling from its translucent depths. Voices that spoke of cities beneath the waves, of civilizations that had watched humanity's rise with patience and hope, and of a future where two species might work together to heal a planet that belonged to both. I resigned from Woods whole 6 months after our encounter. The weight of what I had learned, combined with the restrictions placed on my research, made it impossible to continue my work with any integrity. But I kept the sphere, hidden away in a place where government agents and military officials would never think to look. Sometimes I wonder if Commander Ashworth and his transformed crew are still down there, still waiting for humanity to make the choice he offered us. Other times I wonder if the choice has already been made, and we simply haven't realized it yet. The ocean is not empty. It never has been. And somewhere in its deepest places, intelligence waits with the patience of geological time for humanity to accept its place in a larger community of life. I never published my findings. I never spoke publicly about what we discovered in those depths. But every night, I dream of bioluminescent cities and transformed humans who chose to become something more than human to preserve something more precious than individual life. The sphere still pulses with its inner light, and I know that someday, someone will ask the right questions and find the answers that will change our world forever. Until then, I wait and I remember, and I hope that when that day comes, humanity will be ready for the truth. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to It Happened to Me. A new story drops daily.